cerebellum controls a lot of things, and some of the new research is it's directly related to learning and memory.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tier 1 Intervention Podcast, talking about strengthening the Tier 1 core classroom with academic and non-academic interventions, strategies, and techniques to meet the needs of all students, regardless of ability or disability. I am Jonily Zupancic, and I am here with my partner in education, partner in crime, Cheri Dotterer. When I teach lessons, when I give quizzes, when I come back to content, why do students have so much trouble retrieving the information and recalling the information after I've taught it? So Cheri's going to enlighten us today on everything that's happening that affects memory and retention of content.
Good morning, everybody. It's Cheri Dotterer, your classroom coach and lesson plan whisperer.
What's happening inside your brain? What is sensation?
I've heard you talk about this a lot, but I'm going to say the first thing that came to my mind was feelings. And I know you talk about this difference between feelings and emotion, but there's sometimes I think of this word stimulus when I think sensation and how that makes me feel emotionally, mentally, physically.
Yes, we are a three-part being. We have a mind, we have a body, and we have a spirit. And sensation is a stimulus. Sensation is that touch. It's that what's going into the fovea of the eye. It's that sound that you hear. It's that taste or that smell. All of those things, that initial contact is that initial sensation. And that initial sensation can be calming or alarming. When it's alarming, you're never going to get anything beyond what I call the amygdala hijack. Actually, I don't call that. Somebody else coined that phrase. That phrase was coined by Dr. Daniel Amen. He is a radiologist and psychiatrist. What a combination. But he does some amazing things with radiology, and he's done some research into what happens in the brain with different diagnoses, and he's done some extensive research in how the brain lights up with normal people and atypical people. And as a matter of fact, he has done 80,000 quarterbacks. And he has researched post-concussion, how every concussion changes their brain. So he has a big series on what happens after concussion. So he's very intriguing to me. He wrote a book called Healing ADHD, and that is absolutely one of my favorite books to really delve into ADHD. Change Your Brain, Change Your Life was another one of his books. And he really talks about your health. And he and his wife have an actual health system. Her name's Tana. I'll make sure that we share some of that stuff in the show notes so that you can reach out to him if that interests you. We mentioned the 5 sensations. We mentioned smell, taste, hearing, vision, and touch. And so those are the little icons I have to represent those different sensations. The thing of it is, we have 3 more. Inside, you also have the ability to have sensation. These words are proprioception, vestibular, and interoception. Today, I'm going to delve a little bit into the proprioception, and other podcast episodes, you'll get to hear me talk a little bit more about vestibular and interoception. So what I use the spring for is the proprioception, because proprioception reminds me of a spring. It's the spring that's helping the joint know how far to bounce back and forth. I use the tumbleweed for vestibular because that's the one that makes you go tumble and move. And then the last one really does reflect those feelings that you mentioned earlier, Jonily, and where our inner soul connects with our body. And so emotion and feelings and all of the internal organs are responding to interoception. And let's really dig into the impact of the olfactory system on you in the classroom. The olfactory system, your nose. Think about the anatomy around your head right now. Where does that sense go? It goes straight right into the middle of the brain, into the limbic system. So your brain is basically separated into three parts. It has the brainstem, and that's the back of the neck, which goes up to the center of the brain, which is the limbic system. And then we have the outer layer, which is the cortex. That's where all the thinking occurs and all the comparisons to our world. So that stem is really that rudimentary level. It is controlling things like how fast you breathe, what's going on with your heart rate, turns on and off digestion. When we go up to the limbic system, it takes those sensations that we feel from looking at our eyes, our mouth, and all those other areas and filters them. The thing that's different with sensation of smell is it goes directly into the limbic system. It bypasses the brainstem. And it doesn't go into the cortex directly. It only goes to that association cortex in the frontal lobe, which I'm getting a little technical on you, but I want to say this because the olfactory system is the one that you're going to get a non-thinking response out of. Okay, I'm going to get a little crass maybe here. So you have one of those kids in your classroom that passes one of those very loud gas bubbles, the one that all the other kids are going, ew, that initial response of, ooh, that really did stink. That is all subconscious, which is where the limbic system is. That's your subconscious brain. And all those responses that you cannot control are going right into that limbic system. So that is the only sensation that goes directly into the limbic system that you have no other filter and control. It is raw. Think about the classroom. Do you diffuse essential oils? Or do you diffuse something that you can get off the shelf at the grocery store, like a Glade? It may not be good for all kids. It was the 8th grade math classroom. How about that, Jonily? It was the math classroom. Anyway, the math teacher had Glade push-ups in her plugs all over the room. I think I found 3 of them. But when I opened her door for the first time that morning, I got blasted with an overwhelming smell that I could not tolerate. I started tearing. I started sneezing, and I'm going, oh, this is not going to work today. And then I realized what she had done. So I just gently went through the room, pulled out all of them, and left them sit on the floor or at some place next to where the outlet was. And I left a message for her when I left at the end of the day saying, hey, I pulled them out. This is why I'm allergic to them. So I want you to think about those smells that are going on in your classroom that you may be offering as a calm for some may not be a calm for others. What are your thoughts on that? Did you ever have any experiences where what you thought was calming was not so calming?
No, for me, smell definitely affects my thinking. Just side note here, I grew up in households with cigarette smoking. And I remember the smell just when I would leave the house, the smell on my clothes. It was something that was overwhelming. And then when I moved out to go into a place now where that smell is, it brings back that sensation that I had felt previous. And I never thought about that before, Cheri, when you were talking, but that was one smell that I think really affected my mind, to be honest.
And it will. It's going to block that filtering system from working effectively. The sensation that I'm going to talk a little bit about here is taste. We have a couple different things that happen with taste. We have the taste buds on our tongue that are going to share the different flavors, the bitter, the sweet, the salty. But we also have saliva that's getting put in our mouth. We have that ability to chew straight up and down, or if we have the more advanced chew where we're chewing with our jaw at the bottom going around in a circle. That stimulation from chewing can enhance attention. Sometimes all you need is a cold drink to stimulate attention. So thinking about those kids that are not paying attention in class, that ability to have water with a straw that's going to allow them to suck the water up into their mouth rather than a sports bottle without the funny lid, but just like a regular drink, that's going to give a different effect on their attention. When you have to pucker your lips, you're going to get a stimulus that's getting shot through the brain, and it's going to increase attention.
I've always heard and been told that, and I know for me, now that I'm reflecting on this, chewing gum oftentimes will help me get into a really focused state when I'm doing my work. And then oftentimes I know this is going to sound weird, but chew ice, which helps me think. And is there anything to a taste of a minty flavor that stimulates that brain? So talk to us about that, Cheri, because I know a lot of times in schools when we are doing testing, we might give the kids mints. I know gum is a hot topic. We really don't want kids to have gum, but for me and my work, and when I'm working on projects or presentations or lesson planning, I know that chewing really helps me maintain a good focus. Or is that just in my head?
No, it's not. Mint has a dual effect. Mint goes down into your GI tract and it helps calm digestion. All of our neurotransmitters are made in our gut and they are sent to our brain. So if you're calming all of those anxiety-related feelings that happen in your gut, you're going to have a better connection to the neurotransmitters that need to go back up to your brain. The taste goes a little bit through the brainstem. It goes up into the limbic system as a filter, but there's also this thing in the back of the head called the cerebellum, and that's where we control and we smooth out movement. If you didn't have that cerebellum, when you go to pick up a glass of water, you would be shaking all over the place. And when we have students or adults or whatever that have that jerky movement, that's one of the places that a neurologist will look for a mishap that might be happening in the brain. And the cerebellum controls a lot of things. And some of the new research is it's directly related to learning and memory. So it's directly related to learning and memory. So if the cerebellum isn't working, The cerebellum is going to mess up the connections beyond that point with access to learning. So that system is very important. So ice, chewing, mints are all good to help stimulate thinking and attention in your students. So be careful of temperature, because sometimes temperature isn't always needing to be cold to stimulate attention. Sometimes you just need the actual water. So don't worry so much about the temperature. However, they do know that cold will stimulate more. So if you have a kid who's overstimulated, you might want to give them some warm water. Your tongue is moving, your jaw is moving, so it has to go to the motor cortex and the association cortex to make associations what to say. There's also a part of the temporal lobe, which is on the side of the brain next to the ears. And there's two areas in there. One's called the Broca's area, one called the Wernicke's area. One of those areas helps with receptive speech. The other one helps with expressive speech. So there is a spot where it's going to actually form the words and make associations to the language. It's a little complex, wouldn't you say?
It's very complex. Honestly, Cheri, the amount of information that our kids actually do retain should be celebrated, because there's so much that's going on for learning to happen. And Trinette has a great point to your point, Cheri. I'm just going to reiterate it because I think this is an important statement to make, which is the straw, in using a straw to drink, the sucking. Trinette says the sucking is a calming mechanism, which, Cheri, you've already mentioned that, but I think it's important enough to say that again. Just little things that we can think about, especially, I know we're talking about tier 1 and the full classroom, but especially if we're pulling students one-on-one or in small group and working through maybe an intervention cycle in a smaller group rather than the whole class. I think these are really some key interventions that we can use with kids to help their sensation, and in the end will improve memory, will improve their emotional attachment to the situation. It'll improve their focus. And then long term, it's going to improve the retention of the content that we're trying to get them to master.
Right now, you are getting the beginning part of a 2.5-hour workshop. We are offering you as a podcast listener a discount for your first month. So for a mere $17, you can join us, engage in one of the workshops. If it's not for you, fine, we understand that. But if you're finding that this material is engaging and enriching your lesson planning, if you are an OT and it's enriching your practice in connection with your students, join us for a couple months, and every month after your initial month will be $97, or you can join annually. But I wanted to take this break right here and do that because I really think it's important that you understand that Jonily is going to start going into a much deeper impact and much deeper into making rectangles and how it relates academically. But there's always those underlying connections to what's happening non-academically. And that's where I will interject thoughts and comments. Our next one is auditory. Well, we hear that vision, hearing, and kinesthesia are the 3 types of learning. Why is hearing so important? That is actually one of the first sensations that we really encounter when we're born. The first thing that happens is we yell. And can we hear ourselves yell? Can we hear our mother respond to that yell? And we make those nonverbal communications with the crying. But some kids really have trouble. There is a lot of research, and this is why a lot of kids have tubes in their ears, is there's a lot of connections between central auditory processing disorder and difficulty with hearing. I know my hearing isn't a result of ear infections and stuff, and I never had tubes put in my ears. However, my hearing is a result of being in marching band in the percussion section and being the cymbal player and having that sound constantly in front of me, and that vibration that hits you in the ear can affect your eardrum and also your hearing. So the intensity of sound will also impact. My uncle and my father were both in submarines. My uncle was in the engine room. His hearing, he's just about deaf at this point in his life. My dad has better hearing because he was at a different part on the submarine, but they both have central hearing loss because of the intensity of the sound around them. That's why decibel levels are so crucial to kids learning. I had a student, oh gosh, Mom, this was a private student that I had. Mom was asking me to help her out, and they actually had the audiologist come in an entire day and record the decibel levels throughout the day, because there was a point in time in the day where she would just shut down and go ballistic. And they were trying to figure out if it was decibel level or there was something else going on. So they had one person doing a functional behavioral assessment, and then she was doing the decibel levels. And when the kids had free time, that point in time where the kids are all making all the noise, it was too much for her to handle. So the teacher had to strategically ask her to go to a certain area of the room that was created like a little cocoon that would make it a little bit soft for her. So when we had this free time, that she could then bring herself back into the group, but that sudden change was too much for her to handle. So auditory is really a factor. A lot of kids with that auditory processing disorder, they cannot hear vowel sounds. They can't hear a, e, o, u. They can't hear a, e, I, o, u. That's a little easier. But think about it. If you're talking about the square root of something, or you're talking about parentheses, first of all, they got to know what that symbol means. They have to have that connection to what that looks like. But if they're having trouble understanding what the word is that you're even saying, they got shut down. They're back here trying to process. They lost 5 sentences of what you just said. Next one is vision. And this is probably the one that I know the most about. In my book, I talk about the vision and stuff a lot. And vision is very complicated. We have the stuff coming in through the eye. It goes back through the retina. The nervous system switches sides for half of the vision, and then it stays on the same side for half. It goes back into this back part of the brain called the occipital lobe. It also has some touch in the cerebellum, and it creates a digital file. You know how we have 10s frames and 12s frames and 8s frames? The occipital lobe actually makes it look like a binary code. We get 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Every subtle change in color. I have the green on today, but how many shades of green do I have on? Each one of those greens is a different file of binary code in the occipital lobe. That is sent to the parietal lobe, which is the green part. So the occipital lobe was the pink part. The parietal lobe is where we interpret. And I have the same thing in this hand. It's imaginary right now. I know that. It's round. It has a stem. It has a leaf. Sometimes it's green. Sometimes it's red. Oh, it has this thing on the bottom. It's fleshy on the inside. What is it? We have the other side of the opposite parietal lobe, which is saying, oh, that's an apple. It begins with A. It has two P's, an L, and an E. So we have this logic thing going on. We have this creative thing going on. Those two sides of the parietal lobes have to connect together. That information goes to the association cortex in the frontal lobe. I keep talking about it. That's that blue part. Remember, we have 3 trillion nerves in our brain. When you have a sensation, when you have something that like you're seeing or touching or whatever, you can instantaneously tell that it happened. The last of the senses that we talk about all the time is touch. Touch is even more complex than vision. With touch, we have light touch, heavy touch. We have pain. We have temperature, hot and cold. All of those different areas have nerve. So when somebody is touching your hand, when you touch your own hand, is it hot? Is it cold? Is it good to bad touch? Is it too forceful? Is it just right? And all of those messages go up through the brainstem, through the limbic system, through the cerebellum. They do go into the parietal lobe a little bit because you're trying to make those associations to what you're seeing, end up in the motor cortex and the association cortex. And I'm stopping at that point because once it hits the association cortex, and that's that last stop where everything gets assimilated together. So we have something happen. We have a smell that goes with it. There might be a taste that goes with it. Think about ice cream. You've got a smell. You've got a taste. You might be touching the cone. You might be touching the ice cream itself. You are using a spoon to put that in your mouth. You have the metal. You have all of those sensations. And when it goes to that association cortex, it goes, oh, I'm just eating ice cream. That's okay. Or, oh no, she's putting up a fraction. Oh, I don't know what I'm doing here. And it sees it, and it makes those reactions to that. And it sends messages through that system, which is going to shut down or stimulate your thinking. All this stuff is happening before education can happen. And it's that your sensation system and your motor system start growing the moment you're conceived. Any thoughts so far on the 5 senses?
From what I've heard and making those connections to my work as classroom teacher, math specialist, the 2 sensations that I have really deliberately and intentionally trained myself to support students, to give them the positive sensations that they need for learning to occur, are the vision and the hearing. And I'm going to talk about those today in our extended session. But just to recap, the smell is going to affect or even negate any poor instructional practices that I'm using. So just keeping in mind and being aware of the smell and the feel and some of those other senses subconsciously are going to affect access to learning. And vision and hearing, I think one of the techniques that are going to improve memory and retention of content is with hearing. I will use the strategy, all right, kiddos, I'm going to tell you something and I want you to think about it, but then I'm going to tell you again in a different way. And then I'm going to tell you again yet in a different way, preparing kids for what they're about to hear. And I will very intentionally tell them the same thing 3 different times with pauses in between. and allowing them to process what I'm saying. And as I say it verbally in different ways, it will give different students access to the learning. In addition to telling them what I'm going to tell them, and then telling them very deliberately and intentionally in multiple ways, I want to parallel that with a visual. And that is the big topic for today. Cheri, we had talked about a picture is worth 1,000 words. My work in mathematics and studying why there are, I would say, about 60 to 70% of our kids that struggle innately with mathematics is oftentimes because the words, the language will get in the way, that hearing. But oftentimes the symbols and the notations and the number are so abstract that if I can associate a picture, a context, or an experience with that notation, I'm going to enhance the understanding of this mathematical language that we have. Not only is the brain and the body very complex, but the mathematics is a very complex subject to understand. Go back to that phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Anyone have thoughts on what that phrase, what that quote means, and what that has to do with learning and memory and retention of content?
One thing I feel like is when you associate hearing and vision together with your picture is worth 1,000 words, for any friends that have any visual deficits, if you compare that with the auditory, with the tactile, with the smells, all that kind of stuff, you then can help fill in those gaps of when they do have those visual deficits that they're not able to put that connection together. You're helping build that connection.
Great point. And the pure definition of multisensory. Excellent. That wraps up our time today. And I just have a couple of final thoughts. We started today with this question, why don't kids remember? And Cheri walked us through the complexity of the brain, the body, and the spirit, and how all of those things interact together to produce access to learning. I'm hoping that through you've seen ways that we can connect the medical, brain-based, cognitive science, occupational therapy world to what is natural in learning and have a place in our math classrooms so that numbers come alive. So thanks everybody for being here. This was session 3, Tier 1 interventions.